Hello, my name is Claire Hutchinson, and today I'm going to be talking about labor unions within Germany. The first thing that I'm going to be discussing is the historical development of labor unions. So when unions first emerged in Germany, it was in 1848 to 1849 range. And the first national trade union that showed up in Germany was founded in 1948, and it was during a period of political uprisings and growing industries. This was a crucial moment in German labor history, and workers began to organize, addressing poor working conditions, long hours, low wages, and these things were brought on by rapid economic changes. And during this time, there were major unions that were formed, the first being the VDL, which was known as the Society of German Engineers, and later this actually became known as the Union of German Engineers, or the GDL. This union is actually still active today, and these unions focused on specific trades or professions and began setting a precedent for later movements within Germany. The next major change in the development of labor unions in Germany actually happened post-revolution. So when these unions were being built, like I said, Germany was in the middle of a revolution. And then during this time, they demanded better constitutional rights, economic reforms, and social justice. However, the revolution eventually failed, and there was a lot of backlash from this. So many of the unions were actually disbanded, or a lot of them lost momentum due to government suppression, and this resulted in a significant setback for labor unions and organized laborers. However, a few years later, just in 1869 to 1871, there was a big reform, and this was with new legislative reforms, the main one being the Trade Regulation Act, which actually laid the groundwork for the legal recognition of workers' associations. It also established a legal basis for these commercial activities within Germany, and it also helped standardize business registrations, helped to get more personal freedoms for tradespeople, and it permitted the formation of trade unions or trade partnerships. These changes were essential for the development of labor unions within Germany, and they allowed workers to do these things legally finally. The next major historical development of labor unions happened in 1982, and this was the General Commission of German Trade Unions that was led by a labor leader named Karl Liegen. And this was kind of an umbrella organization that helped to unify a bunch of existing trade unions, which helped give them more power and more influence to get the things that they were fighting for. It also helped bring together a centralized place for different unions to come together and coordinate labor actions to help get better workers' rights, help negotiate with their employers, and even the state. This was a major turning point in the German labor union, and it helped signify a shift for a more structured era of trade unions within Germany. However, not just over 40 years later, unions in Germany took a big step back when Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power in 1933. Just before then, trade unions within Germany were flourishing. There was over 7 million members. However, these unions were seen as a threat to the Nazi Party because they thought it gave the people power, and the Nazis did not want them to have that. So on May 2nd, 1933, labor unions became outlawed, and union members were attacked all throughout Germany. Following this, the Nazis worked to dismantle the trade union movement, and they would raid union offices, they would confiscate union funds, and ultimately just tear them down. Many union leaders were even imprisoned in concentration camps, and during this period, all collective bargaining and any strikes were all eliminated. Wages went down, the work week period went up. They were working, I think, 20% more than before this all happened. So unions in Germany took a really big hit during the Nazi era. In 1945, after World War II, Germany began a huge reconstruction task to their whole country. And during this time, labor unions were also beginning to rebuild. And one of the main things that came out of this was in October of 1949, the German Trade Union Confederation, also known as the DGB, was founded and became the main umbrella organization for trade unions in West Germany. The DGB played a huge role in recovery after the war, and it helped advocate for social justice, fair laws, and economic democracy. Originally, it was founded to help the social and economic rebuilding after the war, but it became a place for unions and workers to unite and help face other things as well. Even today, the DGB has nearly 6 million members and includes over 8 major affiliated unions. It is a huge force in German labor politics and has made such a big impact on unions in Germany. Germany was a divided country for many, many years. However, in 1990, East Germany finally joined the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany, following the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. This reunification of Germany brought about significant changes within the labor unions because they had to adapt to different political, economic, and cultural shifts while restructuring the private and the public sectors between the different countries. And many initial members did end up joining, but ultimately union density took a big hit after the reunification of Germany. The next topic I'm going to be discussing is the current labor legislation within Germany. So within Germany, the union management relations are governed primarily by two frameworks, which is the Works Constitution Act and the Collective Bargaining Law. These two things protect the rights of trade unions, employers, associations, and employees without having state interference. So the Works Constitution Act was originally founded in 1952, but then it was revised later in 1972. And this establishes the rights of employees to form work councils. And these work councils are elected bodies that help represent employees on a workplace level. So not management or anything. This is just for the employees of the employers. And they do not replace unions necessarily, but they help work with them to ensure that everyone is being treated fairly and to ensure that management decisions consider their employees. These councils have a lot of different rights, which including the right to be informed and consulted on business changes, and even in some areas, the right to help make these decisions. They play a huge role in maintaining the conversations between employers and employees. The next big labor legislation that I was going to be discussing is the Collective Agreements Act. And this act helps govern collective bargaining, and it allows trade unions and employers to help negotiate binding agreements that regard wages, hours, working conditions, even vacation hours in some cases. Once these things are agreed upon, these contracts apply to all of the workers within the company. So this really makes a big difference for employees on what they are coming into when they get a job. The next labor legislation that I'm going to discuss is the German Constitution, which isn't necessarily a labor legislation in and of itself. However, in Article 9, Section 3, the Constitution states that The right to form associations to safeguard and improve working and economic conditions shall be guaranteed to every individual and to every occupation or profession. So this constitutional protection helps to ensure that all workers will have the legal right to form or join a union and to engage in collective action. The next topic I'm going to be discussing is union density throughout Germany. Numbers pooled in 2025, Germany's union density is right around 16%. This figure is relatively low compared to other union density polls from around European countries, which just goes to show how union density has been declining in Germany since the reunification in 1990. The majority of the union members in Germany belong to the DGB, which is the largest umbrella organization for trade unions in the country. And like I said before, this 16% union density in Germany, it has come a long way since 1990 and has fallen a lot. So from 1991 to 2001, the DGB lost almost 4 million members. And this is one of the steepest declines in union history, which was driven by, like I said, the social change and even the economic change that happened after East Germany joined West Germany. And during this time, there was higher unemployment within Germany, but more so in the East. And a lot of traditional manufacturing jobs kind of changed or were restructured. But since then, membership has still continued to fall, but just at a slower pace. It has somewhat stabilized, but it's still declining, and there's a lot of challenges that remain in the unions in Germany. And union density is stronger within the public sector for manual workers, and it is weaker in the private sector. So sectors such as public transport, education, healthcare, and other stuff tend to have a higher union density, and their workers in this field are more likely to be employed in structured long-term positions. However, in the private sector and smaller businesses or newer companies, union density is lower. The next main topic I'm going to be discussing is major labor unions and policies within Germany. So as I've talked about before, the German Confederation of Trade Unions, or the DGB, is the largest union in Germany. Their mission is to represent their workers, represent the interests of their workers, and advocate for fair conditions and workers' rights. It is a political umbrella organization that is not directly involved in collective bargaining or organizing strikes, but it rather coordinates the activities of its member unions. Right now, the DGB has about 5.7 million members. The next major labor union within Germany is IG Metall. And IG Metall is the largest industrial union within Germany, and it represents workers in metal, electronics, steel, textile, and other manufacturing sectors. It mainly only represents manufacturing workers as well, and they have about 2.3 million members in there. The last major labor union I'm going to discuss is Verdi, and it is the largest trade union within the public sector, and it represents service workers across many different kinds of industries. They represent 1.9 million service workers, and it was established in 2001 when it merged together 5 other larger unions. Next, I'm going to be discussing major labor policies. So in Germany, major labor policies help focus on worker protection, which includes regulations on hours, minimum wage, PTO, and even equal opportunities. So during the work week, they're supposed to have a standard work week, which ranges from 36 to 40 hours, when most of the full-time jobs operate on a 5-day schedule. The daily limit the weekly limit is 48 hours per week, which translates to an average of about 8 hours per day. They do offer overtime, but it must be compensated by additional pay or even time off. And this is supposed to be outlined within the employment contract. Workers are supposed to also have rest periods, and these employees are entitled to a minimum rest period of 11 consecutive hours between working days. They also are supposed to have breaks, so if you do more than 6 hours a day, their laws demand they have at least a 30-minute break within that time period. The next thing I'm going to discuss is the roles of government in union management. So in Germany, the government's role is primarily to help facilitate and kind of oversee collective bargaining and to help kind of create a framework for social partnerships and workers' participation in these unions rather than directly intervening in the details. So the first thing that is part of their role is collective bargaining. So the German system helps emphasize collective bargaining at kind of an industry-wide level that sets up unions and employer associations to help negotiate agreements for wages, conditions, and other things. These agreements kind of serve as a outline for union workplaces or even non-union workplaces to promote consistent standards across the public and the private sector. The government works as a facilitator, and they help setting the role in also legal framework for collective bargaining and other things. It also enforces key labor laws such as the Works Constitution Act, the Collective Agreements Act, and offers a venue to help resolve conflict. Additionally, government may also monitor employer compliance of these laws, and it will provide services only when necessary. Next, the government helps within work councils. So the companies who have more than 500 employees have work councils, as I defined before, and they have the employees that represent specific councils, and they are elected by the workforce and have rights to be consulted on matters, as I discussed before, such as making decisions or at least be aware of decisions that are being made. They do not, however, negotiate wages, but they play a key role in relationship management within companies. Next is co-determination, which is a German system where workers have a say in company decisions, sort of like how work councils do. In some firms, workers may hold half the seats on a board, which helps give them influence over decisions that are being made. Lastly, within the public sector, the government directly participates in collective bargaining to the employer. The government helps balance the fiscal responsibility and maintain fair labor standards, which they must discuss between the federal and state. The last thing that I'm going to be discussing is the impact of globalization on union management relationships. So globalization has led to both challenges and opportunities for union management relations within Germany for a couple different reasons. The first reason being increased competition. So globalization has led to increased competition within global markets, which forces their companies to try to reduce costs and become more efficient. Next is outsourcing. So companies may choose to relocate production to other countries because they have lower labor costs, which might lead to job losses within Germany and decrease union influence. This can undermine unions' bargaining power in industries where production is easily transferable. Next is the pressure on wages. So the threat of companies relocating to lower cost countries can lead to more pressure on wages and benefits within companies in Germany. And lastly is changing skill requirements. So globalization can lead to a need for workers to have new skills, which might create challenges for unions because they need to make sure their workers have the necessary training and even opportunities. And here are my references.